"Sir, take your son and leave now," whispered Rebecca, the hospital receptionist, her eyes filled with terror as she nervously glanced down the empty hallways behind me. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday night in Denver, Colorado. I was there to visit my granddaughter Emma, who had been admitted after a bicycle accident. Or at least that's what my son David had told me on the phone a few hours earlier. Rebecca grabbed my arm tightly. "Please trust me. Don't go into that room. Don't sign anything. Just take your son and get out of here now." Her words hit me like a punch in the stomach. My name is William Morrison, and at 62, I've been through a lot in my life. I lost my wife Margaret 3 years ago in a car accident. I built a successful engineering company from scratch. I overcame betrayals by partners and financial crises that would have broken younger men. But I never imagined I would be standing in a hospital lobby, being warned by a stranger about a danger that apparently involved my own son. "What's going on, Rebecca?" I asked quietly, feeling my heart race. "Where's Emma? Is she okay?" The receptionist looked around once more before whispering, "Emma isn't admitted here, Mr. Morrison. She never was. But there are 3 men in room 212 who have been waiting for you for 2 hours. And one of them has documents with your signature on them." The blood ran cold in my veins. Signature. Documents. Men waiting. For the past 6 months, David had been pressuring me constantly about my retirement, about transferring the company's assets, about simplifying things while I was still mentally capable. His words, not mine. His wife Rachel always smiled sweetly during these conversations, but there was something in her eyes that bothered me. A thinly veiled impatience, as if she were calculating something I couldn't comprehend. "Mr. Morrison," Rebecca continued, her voice even lower. "I overheard part of their conversation when they brought coffee. They talked about an accident that was supposed to happen after you signed the papers. Something about not leaving any loose ends." My mind began to process the information with the coldness of an engineer analyzing a faulty design. All the signs were there. The increasingly rare visits. The questions about my inheritance plans. The insistence on removing me from the company. And now this. A carefully planned trap using my own granddaughter as bait. It was at that moment that I heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. Rebecca paled even more. "They're coming here. Someone called an ambulance for room 212. It'll be here in 5 minutes." The puzzle pieces fell into place in my mind. They weren't just planning to rob me. They were planning to kill me and make it look like a medical accident. An elderly man who had a heart attack after signing important documents. Natural. No suspicions. "Rebecca," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "Do you have children?" "I have an 8-year-old daughter," she replied, confused. "Then you understand that a father would do anything to protect his family, even if that family has turned against him." The sirens were getting louder. I could hear voices coming from the second-floor hallway. Familiar voices. My son's voice coordinating something he thought would be my ultimate destruction. But David made a crucial mistake. He underestimated the man who raised him. If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what I discovered next about my own son would change everything forever. Because sometimes, when you think you know someone completely, life has a very cruel way of showing you how wrong you were. And sometimes, pretending to be the victim is the only way to find out how far the betrayal of those who should love you unconditionally will go. The sirens stopped right in front of the hospital. Through the glass entrance, I saw 2 paramedics getting out of an ambulance, carrying a folding stretcher and a medical emergency kit. They didn't seem to be in a hurry. It was almost rehearsed. Rebecca grabbed my arm again. "Mr. Morrison, please. They know you're here. I saw one of the men upstairs check the parking lot 3 times looking for your car." My mind was racing, connecting dots I had ignored for months. David had always been ambitious, but in the last 2 years something had changed dramatically. After Margaret died, he became obsessed with my mental stability and my well-being. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, had been especially caring lately, always asking about my blood pressure medication, suggesting that I might be confused about business matters, insisting that I needed to relax and let the family take care of everything. Now I understood. It wasn't care. It was preparation. "Rebecca," I whispered, "you said you heard them talking about an accident. What kind of accident?" She hesitated, glancing nervously at the elevator. Something about the wrong medication. They said a man your age, under stress, could easily have an adverse reaction. Especially if he was taking the wrong dosage. My blood ran cold. 3 weeks ago, Rachel had kindly offered to organize my medications into one of those weekly pill dispensers. To make sure Dad is taking everything correctly, she had said with that sweet, fake smile. During that same period, David had insisted that I transfer the day-to-day management of Morrison Engineering to him. Just until you feel better, Dad. You deserve a rest. I had resisted, but I was beginning to consider it. Maybe he was right. Maybe I really did need help. How foolish I had been. The elevator doors opened in the lobby and David appeared. Even from a distance, I could see that he was agitated, constantly checking his cell phone. He scanned the lobby until his eyes met mine. For a second, I saw something in his face I had never noticed before. It wasn't filial concern. It was cold, calculating impatience. As if I were a technical problem that was taking too long to resolve. He walked toward me with a forced smile. Dad. I'm glad you're here. Emma is fine, but the doctors want to run some additional tests. They need you to sign some authorization forms. What kind of forms, David? Oh, you know how hospitals are. Lots of red tape. Authorization for treatment, financial responsibility, that kind of thing. Rachel is upstairs with Emma right now. Each word came out naturally, but there was something mechanical about the way he spoke. As if he were following a script. The paramedics passed us on their way to the elevator. David waved to them as if they were old acquaintances. One of them gave a discreet nod. At that moment, everything fell into place in my mind. The hospital. The documents. The accident. The paramedics who already knew my son. They had planned this meticulously. I would go up to room 212, sign the papers transferring everything to David, then have a medical emergency, conveniently shortly thereafter. The paramedics were already standing by. The cause of death would be a heart attack induced by incorrect medication, compounded by the stress of worrying about his hospitalized granddaughter. David would legitimately inherit everything. Rachel would become a wealthy widow. And I would become yet another medical statistic of an elderly man who couldn't handle the stress of a family situation. The plan was almost perfect. Almost. David, I said calmly, where exactly is Emma right now? He hesitated for a split second. In room 212, of course. Why do you ask? Because Emma has been in Los Angeles with her friend Jessica for 2 weeks. I drove her to the airport myself. David's face turned pale. His jaw twitched, the same nervous tic he'd had since childhood when caught in a lie. Dad, you must be confused. The stress, your age, maybe you've forgotten. Forgotten? Or are you lying to me, son? At that moment, Rachel appeared in the lobby, walking quickly toward us. She wore that mask of maternal concern that I had learned to detest. William. Thank God you're here. Emma is asking for you. Rachel, I said, looking directly into her eyes, Emma is in Los Angeles. She blinked several times, then looked at David with barely concealed panic. That's when I realized that Rachel was the mastermind behind the operation. David was just the front, the concerned son who would legitimately inherit everything. But Rachel was the one who had orchestrated every detail. William, she said softly, are you sure you're not confusing the dates? You've seemed a little disoriented lately. It was brilliant. Even now, with the plan exposed, she was still trying to convince me that I was the problem. That my own memory was unreliable. The paramedics stepped out of the elevator and approached the group. One of them looked at David and whispered, everything's ready upstairs. Rachel patted the paramedic on the shoulder. Thank you, you've been very professional. It was at that moment that I knew with absolute certainty, my son and daughter-in-law were planning to murder me. And if it weren't for the courage of a receptionist who didn't even know me, I would have been dead within an hour. But they made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the man who had built a multimillion-dollar company from scratch. The man who had survived 3 economic crises and 2 divorces from dishonest partners. The man who now knew exactly who his real enemies were. And the revenge I was about to orchestrate would be as meticulous and devastating as the plan they had made to destroy me. Because when you try to kill an engineer, you better make sure you know all the specifications of the project. The paramedic who had whispered to David approached me with a perfectly rehearsed professional smile. Mr. Morrison? I'm Brad, from the Emergency Medical Service. I understand you have some high blood pressure issues. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a dossier they already had. Blood pressure issues? I repeated, looking directly at Rachel. Funny, my doctor never mentioned that in recent appointments. Rachel laughed nervously. William, you know how doctors are. They always downplay things so as not to worry older patients. Older. Every word that came out of her mouth now revealed layers of contempt that I had chosen to ignore for years. The second paramedic approached carrying a folding stretcher. Sir, it would be best if we could take you in for a quick evaluation. Just to make sure everything is okay before you visit your granddaughter. David placed his hand on my shoulder with a pressure that was not affectionate, but possessive. Dad, they just want to make sure you're okay. After that, we can sort out Emma's papers and go home. It was then that I noticed a detail that made my blood run cold. The paramedic named Brad was wearing latex gloves, but there was a dark stain on the tip of his index finger. It wasn't dirt. It was ink. The same dark blue ink from the pens I used to sign important documents. They had practiced my signature. How many times? On how many documents? How long had they been planning this? Rebecca was still behind the counter, pretending to work, but her eyes kept meeting mine. She knew I understood the extent of the situation. David, I said calmly, can I talk to you for a moment? In private. Rachel stepped forward. William, I don't think this is the time for family conversations. You seem a little confused, and the paramedics. Rachel, I interrupted in the voice I used to fire incompetent employees. I wasn't talking to you. The silence that followed was thick. David looked nervously at his wife, then at the paramedics, as if he needed permission to speak to his own father. That told me everything I needed to know about the hierarchy of this operation. We walked a few steps toward the hospital cafeteria, far enough away that we couldn't be heard, but still within sight of Rachel and her uniformed accomplices. David, I began quietly, how long have you known about the money in the offshore accounts? His face drained of color. It was a test question. I didn't have any offshore accounts. But his reaction confirmed that they had investigated my finances much more thoroughly than I had imagined. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. 47 million, David. That's a lot of money to just disappear, don't you think? He started to sweat. Literally sweat. Beads formed on his forehead as he tried to process information about money that didn't exist. How did you? I didn't. Didn't you know that I knew that you knew? I smiled coldly. My son, did you really think a man wouldn't reach the age of 62 building a multimillion-dollar company without learning how to protect his assets? It was a lie, of course. But David didn't know that. And the look of growing panic on his face revealed something far more valuable to me than the truth. He and Rachel had planned my murder, assuming they knew my entire financial situation. They were wrong. Dad, look, maybe we should talk about this at home without pressure, without fake paramedics waiting to drug me. His legs almost gave way. He looked desperately at Rachel, who was watching our conversation from a distance with growing anxiety. David, I continued, my voice now carrying the weight of 3 decades of business experience, you have exactly 30 seconds to explain to me how you plan to fake my death. Dad, for God's sake, you're delirious. 25 seconds. And with every second you waste lying to me, the value of your future consequences increases exponentially. He broke. Completely. It was Rachel's idea, he whispered desperately. She said you were getting senile, that we would lose everything if we didn't act soon. The plan was simple, you would sign over your assets to me, then have a heart attack caused by a drug interaction. Natural. No suspicions. Every word was a stab in the heart, not just because of the betrayal, but because of the cruel simplicity of the scheme. What about Emma? Where is my granddaughter really? In California, as you said. But Rachel thought you wouldn't remember the dates correctly, that we could convince you she was here. You seriously underestimated the man who raised you, David. It was at that moment that I looked around the hospital with completely different eyes. It was no longer a place where I was in danger. It was a battlefield. And I had just discovered that I knew the terrain much better than my enemies. During my career, I had faced hostile takeover attempts, industrial sabotage, blackmail from competitors, and even a federal investigation fabricated by a vengeful former partner. I survived it all using the same strategy, turning my opponent's weapons against them. And now, looking at my broken son in front of me and my calculating daughter-in-law watching our conversation, I knew exactly what I needed to do. "David," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder with feigned compassion, "I appreciate your honesty. Now let's go back to Rachel and work this out as a family." The confusion in his eyes was instantaneous. What do you mean?" "I mean," I replied with a smile that Margaret always said made me look dangerous, "that you've just given me all the information I need to make your lives a hell far more creative than anything you planned for me. Because if my own son thought he could murder me and inherit my fortune, he was about to find out that underestimating William Morrison was the last mistake anyone should ever make. And the lesson I was about to teach would be as devastating as it was educational. Some parents protect their children from the consequences of their actions. Others, as I was about to become, ensure that those consequences are unforgettable." We walked back toward Rachel and her uniformed accomplices. David was trying to regain his composure, but his steps were hesitant, like those of a man walking toward his own trial. "Are you okay, Dad?" Rachel asked in that honeyed voice that now made me nauseous. "You guys took a long time talking." "Just family matters," I replied calmly, watching the two paramedics waiting with professional patience. David was explaining the documents I need to sign. The look of relief on her face was almost comical. She really thought she had one. "Perfect," she said, linking her arm possessively through mine. "So can we go upstairs now? The doctors are waiting." It was at that moment that I made the most important decision of my life. I looked directly into her eyes and smiled, not a smile of resignation, but the same smile I used when closing multimillion-dollar deals. "Sure, Rachel. Let's get this over with." During the elevator ride, I studied each of the people present. Paramedic Brad nervously checked his cell phone. The second paramedic, whose name I still didn't know, maintained a posture that was too rigid for someone on actual emergency duty. David avoided my gaze completely. And Rachel radiated a confidence that told me exactly how far she had planned this operation. "William," she whispered as the elevator rose, "I want you to know that this is all for your own good. David and I just want you to have peace in your final years." "How thoughtful," I murmured, noticing that she was already speaking of me in the past tense. Room 212 was a private suite overlooking the parking lot. On the side table was a folder of documents organized with military precision. Specific colored pens. A small digital recorder. And 3 men in suits who were clearly not doctors. "William Morrison," said the tallest man, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Kane, from the law firm Kane and Associates. We've brought some important documents for your review." I shook his hand, noting the calculated firmness of his grip. "What documents, Mr. Kane?" "Documents transferring management of Morrison Engineering to your son. Also some adjustments to your will, considering your recent medical condition." Medical condition. They had invented a medical condition for me. David finally spoke up. "Dad, with your high blood pressure and the episodes of confusion you've been having lately, we thought it best to simplify things." Episodes of confusion. Brilliant. They were constructing a fake medical history in real time. "What episodes, David?" Rachel stepped forward. "William, do you remember last week when you asked 3 times about the same project? Or when you forgot where you parked your car at the mall?" Perfect lies. Situations that could have happened to anyone, but presented as evidence of mental decline. Mr. Kane opened the folder. "If we can start with the transfer of administrative powers document." That's when I realized they had exceeded all my expectations. It wasn't just a plan to kill me. It was a plan to legally remove me first, establishing medical and legal precedents that would justify any future action. If I died in that room, it would be merely the logical conclusion of a man who had already lost his mental faculties. "Of course," I said, picking up the first pen. "But first, may I ask a question?" "Of course," Kane replied. "In which bank do you plan to deposit the transfer amounts?" David and Rachel exchanged glances. Kane hesitated for just a second. "That would be determined later, based on appropriate financial advice. I see, I said, studying the document. And Emma? How does she fit into this transfer of assets? Emma. Rachel looked genuinely confused. My granddaughter. The reason I'm here. The silence that followed was revealing. They had completely forgotten the lie that had brought them there. Kane recovered first. Mr. Morrison, I think there's some confusion. You're here for a routine medical evaluation. 3 different versions of the same lie in 5 minutes. Amateurs. I began signing the first document, watching as everyone visibly relaxed. But as my hand moved the pen, my mind was working at full speed. During my career, I had developed a specific method for dealing with hostile takeover attempts. Document everything, create redundancies, and always have an exit strategy that the attackers never considered. And at that moment, realizing I was the victim of the most personal hostile takeover of my life, I decided to apply exactly the same strategy. Done, I said, handing over the signed document. What's next? The second document was even more specific. Complete transfer of all corporate bank accounts to David, with Rachel as co-signer. As I signed, I asked casually, by the way, have you checked Morrison Engineering's records for the last 6 months? Why do you ask? David replied too quickly. Curiosity. There have been some interesting movements that you should know about before taking over. Kane leaned forward. What kind of movements? Offshore investments. Contracts with European subsidiaries. Nothing illegal, of course, but complex. It was a lie, but the look of growing panic on their faces confirmed that they hadn't done their due diligence. They were stealing a company without even knowing what it was really worth or owed. Rachel whispered something in David's ear. He nodded and approached Kane. As they whispered to each other, the paramedics discreetly moved closer to the door. It wasn't a casual positioning. It was a containment strategy. Mr. Morrison, Kane finally said, perhaps we should get this over with quickly. You must be tired. Actually, I'm feeling pretty good, I replied, signing the third document. Better than I've felt in months. The irony was perfect. The closer they got to murdering me, the more alert and energized I felt. That's when Brad, the paramedic, made his move. Mr. Morrison, how about we check your blood pressure before we continue? Just to make sure everything is okay. He approached with a blood pressure cuff and something else, a small syringe hidden behind the equipment. Sure, I said, extending my arm. It's always good to check. As he adjusted the cuff, I whispered low enough that only he could hear, Brad, do you have children? He hesitated, confused. Sir. Children. Do you have children? I have 2 boys. How old? 7 and 9, he replied automatically, still confused about the direction of the conversation. Those are important ages, I continued calmly. Ages when they begin to understand the difference between right and wrong. To form opinions about what kind of man their father is. His hands began to shake slightly. The syringe remained hidden, but he couldn't continue with the movement. Mr. Morrison, How long have you been a paramedic, Brad? 8 years. And in 8 years, how many times have you helped save lives? Hundreds. And today? The silence was deafening. Brad looked at the syringe in his hands, then at David and Rachel, who were watching him expectantly. Today, I whispered just to him, are you going to tell your children that you saved a life or that you took one? Brad took a step back. The syringe fell to the floor. I can't do this, he said, his voice breaking. It was then that I knew I had won the first battle. But the war was just beginning. Rachel advanced like a snake. William, you're confusing Brad. Maybe you should get some rest. No, Rachel, I said, slowly getting up. I think I'd better go home and reevaluate a few things. Especially my family situation. The mask finally fell from her face. The sweet expression disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. You're not going anywhere, William. We've come too far to stop now. And it was with that sentence that she revealed something that would completely change my strategy for revenge. Because if you've been following this story so far and want to see how a 62-year-old man turns his own family into a life lesson, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because sometimes, Underestimating the experience of someone who built an empire from scratch is the last mistake certain people make in life. And Rachel was about to find out that when you attack an engineer, you better have calculated all the variables of the structure you're trying to tear down. The expression on Rachel's face changed completely when she uttered those fatal words. "We've come too far to stop now." It was as if a mask had finally fallen, revealing the true face of the woman I had mistakenly considered family for years. "Interesting choice of words, Rachel," I said, slowly getting up and adjusting my jacket. "Because in fact, you haven't come far enough." Kane, the lawyer, frowned. "Mr. Morrison, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that you made the most basic mistake in any operation. You underestimated your target." I walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot. "Do you really think a man doesn't reach 62 years of age building an empire without learning to identify predators?" David finally found his voice. "Dad, what are you talking about? You signed the documents." "Oh, I signed them," I confirmed, turning to face them. "But did you check that they were the correct documents?" The silence that followed was deafening. Kane was the first to move, quickly grabbing the papers from the table. His expression changed dramatically as he read. These aren't the documents we prepared," he muttered. "Of course they're not," I replied calmly. "While you were whispering your plans in this room, I was switching the documents. The papers you gave me now name me as the sole beneficiary of all of David and Rachel Morrison's property, including the house you bought last year." Rachel turned pale. "That's impossible. We checked." "You checked the right documents. You just didn't check that I had replaced them with others that looked identical." I smiled coldly. "Rebecca wasn't the only one who noticed your suspicious activities." It was then that Kane discovered the true extent of the problem. "Mr. Morrison, these documents have valid notary seals and they were notarized 3 weeks ago by the same notary you intended to use. The difference is that I got there first." I picked up my cell phone. "Would you like to see the recording of you planning my murder?" The entire room froze. David began to sweat profusely. "Recording?" Rachel whispered. "Rebecca wasn't just a helpful receptionist. She was my informant all along." I held up my phone, where Rachel's clear voice could be heard. "With this, everything will be mine, and when the old man shows up, if he shows up, he won't have a penny to complain about." David staggered. "Dad, I didn't know she." "Of course you knew, David. You're on the recording too. Dad won't suspect a thing. He trusts us. Remember that line." Kane tried to take control of the situation. "Mr. Morrison, even if you had recordings, that wouldn't invalidate." "Wouldn't invalidate what? The murder plans? The document forgery? Or perhaps you're referring to the offshore account Rachel opened in your name, Mr. Kane." The look of terror on the lawyer's face was instantaneous. "How did you? That's not possible. How could I have found out?" "Kane, I spent 30 years auditing companies. Financial tracking is literally my specialty." I took another piece of paper from my inside jacket pocket. "Bank of Nassau, account number 759421. $50,000 deposited yesterday by Rachel Morrison, plus $10,000 you received last week." Rachel tried to run for the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Funny," I remarked, "the doors on this floor lock automatically after 8 p.m. hospital security measure." "You set us up," she hissed. "No, Rachel. You set yourselves up. I just turned it into a life lesson." I looked at David, who seemed to be having a nervous breakdown. "My son, do you want to know what your biggest mistake was?" He looked at me with eyes red from crying. "What?" "You forgot who you were dealing with. I'm not just your father. I'm William Morrison, the man who turned a small engineering office into a $40 million company. Did you really think I wouldn't notice suspicious activity in my own accounts?" Kane tried one last card. "Mr. Morrison, this is all very emotional, but legally." "Legally, Mr. Kane, the FBI is coming up to this floor right now." I looked at my watch. "In fact, they should be here in about 3 minutes." As if by magic, the sound of sirens began to approach the hospital. They weren't ambulances this time. "How?" David whispered. "Because while you were planning my death, I was planning your exposure. Rebecca wasn't my only ally." I took out my cell phone and showed him a list of contacts. Jake Morrison, my nephew, is a federal agent. Carmen Morrison, my niece, is a federal prosecutor. And Michael Morrison, my cousin, is a federal judge. The realization hit Rachel like a train. The Morrison family. It's much bigger than you researched. I smiled with genuine satisfaction. You investigated my financial situation, my habits, my routine. But you forgot to research my family tree. The sirens stopped in front of the hospital. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. David collapsed into a chair, completely defeated. Dad. I'm sorry. David, I said, my voice finally carrying all the pain of a betrayed father, you tried to kill me. Apologies won't cover that. The door opened and 3 federal agents entered the room, followed by the county sheriff. Mr. Morrison, said the lead agent. I'm Agent Foster. We received your complaint. Kane tried one last desperate move. Agents, I'm a lawyer and I can explain. Kane and Associates was shut down 2 hours ago by federal order, the agent replied coldly. And you have an arrest warrant for conspiracy and attempted murder. Rachel tried to negotiate. Agent, there's been a misunderstanding. Ma'am, the recording we received is quite clear about your intentions. He turned to me. Mr. Morrison, do you have the evidence you mentioned? I handed him a sealed envelope. Financial documents, audio recordings, hospital security videos from the last 3 days, and a complete list of all bank accounts involved. David looked at me with a mixture of terror and respect. How long have you known? Since the first day Rachel suggested you take over the company, son. Since the first medication she arranged for me. Since the first time you lied about where Emma was. I paused. You weren't clever. You were predictable. The agents began reading her rights. As they cuffed Rachel, she stared at me with pure hatred. You won't be able to live with this, William. Destroying your own family. Rachel, I said calmly, you destroyed the family the moment you decided to murder me for money. I just documented the destruction. David was the last to be handcuffed. Before he was taken away, he looked at me one last time. Dad, is there any chance you'll ever forgive me? I looked deep into the eyes of the man I had raised, educated, and loved unconditionally. The same man who had meticulously planned my death. David, I replied, my voice breaking, forgiveness is earned. And you have a lifetime in prison to think about that. As they were led away, Rebecca appeared at the door with a relieved smile. Mr. Morrison, is everything okay? It is now, my dear. Thank you very much. Did you know I would help you? Rebecca, I said, grabbing my coat, I learned early in life that good people recognize good people. You saved me on the first day. I just returned the favor. We left the hospital together. Outside, blue and red lights lit up the night. As I watched the FBI van drive away with what was left of my family, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Mr. Morrison? Rebecca asked softly, what are you going to do now? I looked up at the Denver night sky. Now, Rebecca, I'm going to live the rest of my life knowing that I chose justice over a toxic family. And that's a choice I can live with peacefully. Because sometimes, when the people you love most become the people who want to destroy you the most, the only thing left to do is show them that underestimating someone who has survived 6 decades of life is the last mistake anyone should ever make. And as I walked to my car on that cold Colorado night, I knew that David and Rachel had just learned that lesson in the most painful way possible. 6 months later, I was sitting in David's former office at Morrison Engineering, now completely renovated. The dark walls he had chosen were replaced with clear glass and light wood. The symbolism was no coincidence. The phone rang. It was Jake, my nephew in the FBI. Uncle William, I thought you'd like to know. David was sentenced to 12 years for attempted murder and fraud. Rachel got 15 years as the leader of the operation. Kane was disbarred and got 20 years. And the paramedics? Brad cooperated fully. He got 2 years probation and is doing community service at a children's hospital. The other one, Marcus, who refused to cooperate, got 5 years. Brad had come to see me 2 weeks after the events at the hospital. He brought his 2 children to apologize to me in person. I saw a real transformation in that man's eyes. Sometimes, almost losing everything is what someone needs to find who they really are. The office door opened and Emma came running in, back from her trip to California. At 10 years old, she still didn't fully understand what had happened, only that Mom and Dad had made some serious mistakes, and couldn't see her for a very long time. "Grandpa William," she shouted, throwing herself into my arms. "I missed you." "I missed you too, little one." Rebecca, who now worked as my executive assistant after leaving the hospital, came in right behind Emma. "Mr. Morrison, the custody lawyer, is here for the final meeting." Emma now officially lived with me. David had signed the custody transfer papers from prison, one of the only good things he had done during this whole process. During the custody hearing, the judge had asked Emma where she wanted to live. Her answer was simple: with Grandpa William. He never lied to me. The transformation in my life was complete. Morrison Engineering thrived under new ethical management. I implemented an employee advisory board, total financial transparency, and a corporate ethics program that became a model for other companies in the region. But the biggest change was personal. Emma taught me that protecting family doesn't mean accepting toxicity. It means identifying who truly deserves that sacred title. Rachel never tried to contact us again. According to Jake, she had hired the best lawyer money could buy, but there was no defense for voice recordings planning murder. David, on the other hand, wrote to me from prison once a month. Letters full of genuine regret and questions about Emma. I answered them all, keeping him informed about his daughter's growth, but making it clear that forgiveness would be something earned through years of real change, not words written on prison paper. "Grandpa," Emma said as we organized her school supplies, "will Daddy ever be able to come home?" "Emma," I replied carefully, "people who make bad choices sometimes need to be away for a long time to learn how to make better choices. What matters is that you will always have a safe home here with me." What if he learns? Then we'll talk about it when the time comes. But for now, our family is just the two of us, and that's perfect. In David's last letter he wrote, "Dad, I understand if you never forgive me. But I want Emma to know that the biggest regret of my life was choosing money over family. You taught us values that I abandoned for ambition. Now I see that the real failure wasn't losing your fortune, but losing your trust." I kept that letter with all the others. Maybe one day Emma will want to read them. Maybe she'll understand that people can change, but that real change takes time, sacrifice, and proof through actions. Rebecca knocked on the door. "Mr. Morrison, the journalist from the Denver Post, is here for the interview." "What interview?" "About the business ethics program we implemented. Apparently our story has inspired other family businesses to review their governance structures." I smiled. I had completely forgotten. In recent months, several companies had approached me for advice on how to protect family businesses from internal conflicts. "Emma, would you like to meet a real journalist?" Her eyes lit up. "Can I ask her questions too?" "Of course you can." As we walked to the meeting room, I reflected on the entire journey. The William Morrison who entered that hospital 6 months ago was a naive man who believed that family love was unconditional. Today's William Morrison knew that true love sometimes means setting hard boundaries to protect those who really matter. The interviewer, a middle-aged professional woman named Sarah, had prepared questions focused on business transformation, but she soon discovered that the real story was about human transformation. "Mr. Morrison, what was the most important lesson you learned from this whole experience?" I looked at Emma, who was drawing beside me, completely confident and happy. "I learned that we don't have to tolerate toxicity in the name of love. That real family is defined by choices, not blood. And that sometimes, to save what is truly precious, we must have the courage to let go of what was already lost." "Any regrets?" "Only one. Regret for not acting sooner." If this story of overcoming adversity and family transformation touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of people who discovered their strength in the most difficult moments. Because in the end, William Morrison wasn't just a man who survived an assassination attempt. He was a grandfather who chose to build a home where his granddaughter would grow up knowing that true love protects, not destroys. And that, believe me, is the most important victory of all.